This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top story is thousands of people flee the Hawaiian island of Maui, where a raging wildfire has killed at least 36 people and burnt entire neighbourhoods to the ground. Our other headlines: West African leaders meet again to discuss the crisis in Niger as coup leaders name their new governments. 3 days of mourning and a state of emergency declared in Ecuador after a presidential candidate is assassinated at a campaign rally. And the United States moves to restrict new American investments in China's high-tech sector. China calls it economic coercion. At least 36 people have died and thousands have been moved to safety as fast-moving wildfires devastate the Hawaiian island of Maui. Dozens of people have been injured since the fires, whipped up by a hurricane, began burning on Tuesday. A search and rescue operation is now underway, with some people still unaccounted for. Our correspondent Li Jianhua reports.
Oh my gosh, look at the harbor. Oh my gosh.
This is what's left of the resort city of Lahaina after wildfires fanned by winds of a distant hurricane engulfed Hawaii's Maui island. Multiple neighborhoods were reportedly burnt to the ground. Thousands of people, locals or tourists, were forced to evacuate as a state of emergency was declared.
Woke up this morning and got on our phones to pictures of our house just down to the slab, nothing but smoke.
Was hoping for a place to stay here, but everything's sold out. Got lucky, we had family that was visiting too, and gonna crash the night, maybe sleep in the car and catch our flight in the morning back home, because it looks like there is no flights.
The National Weather Service says dry vegetation, strong winds from Hurricane Dora and low humidity were to blame for the bushfires. Hawaii's acting governor said state officials didn't anticipate the hurricane could whip up wildfires on such a scale.
We never anticipated in this state that a hurricane which did not make impact on our islands will cause this type of wildfires. Wildfires that wiped out communities, wildfires that wiped out businesses, wildfires that destroyed homes.
The western side of the island of Maui has been nearly cut off, with only one highway open for emergency workers and those leaving the area. Li Jianhua, CGTN.
Tropical storm Kanun has brought heavy rain to South Korea, leaving at least one person there dead. More than a foot of rain fell in eastern and southern areas after the storm made landfall. Our correspondent Jack Barton reports.
On Jeju Island, south of the mainland, hundreds of flights have already been cancelled, along with all ferries to and from the popular tourist destination. South Korea is on a state of high alert. The evacuation of hundreds of people from areas that might be flooded by rains of up to 100 millimeters per hour has already been carried out. Gangwon on the east coast is forecast to receive a deluge totaling about 600 millimeters. Within the inner 120-kilometer radius of the typhoon, gusts of up to 35 meters per second are expected. Dozens of sea routes, roads, and hundreds of hiking trails across the country have been closed off. Local governments are inspecting facilities susceptible to flooding, along with anything that might collapse due to strong winds. The government has ordered extra care for the 36,000 scouts moved from a trouble-plagued jamboree site by buses, one of which was involved in an accident while transporting Swiss scouts. People are also being warned to stay away from coastal areas as well as anywhere that might be susceptible to landslides, rockfalls or electrical hazards, especially in light of the number of high casualties caused by recent heavy rains. Jack Barton, CGTN, Goje, South Korea.
West African leaders are meeting for a second emergency summit about the crisis in Niger. This comes as the military junta in the country names its new cabinet. Heads of the ECOWAS group of countries are meeting in the Nigerian capital, Abuja, to agree on a plan of action after the coup leaders refused to stand down. Military chiefs have already ignored one deadline to return Niger to civilian rule. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Deji Badamosi, in Lagos. Deji, ECOWAS has already hinted it might use force to try to restore democracy in Niger. What concrete outcomes or announcements might we expect from this new summit?
Well, Jamie, indeed, ECOWAS, had a hardline posture in the past, but the tone appears to be changing because just before that meeting got underway, the president of Nigeria, who doubles as the chair of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State, addressed the press, and he did say that ECOWAS would now prioritize diplomacy and dialogue going forward, that will be, according to him, the bedrock for ECOWAS's talks now with the military junta there in Niger. So it's very likely at the end of this meeting, what we are likely to see would be a move away from that initial hardline posture now and the threat of a military intervention. Because you look at the way things are now, it appears the ECOWAS leaders have already been foisted with more or less a fait accompli because the Nigerian military junta have now gone up to set up a government. So they've consolidated their hold on power. They enjoy massive support, especially in the capital, Niamey. So, ECOWAS, of course, is taking a hint from all of this. And then just yesterday, we know one of the a former emir now of the Nigerian commercial northern city of Kano actually met with General Tiani in Niger. And after that meeting, he met with President Tinubu. So it's very likely, too, that the change of posture might be the outcome of that meeting that took place, even though the former emir now has not actually disclosed what he discussed with the military junta there. So it's not likely we're going to see ECOWAS now insisting on a military intervention after this meeting. But let's just wait and see what happens.
I mean, there is a lot of public opposition to military intervention in Niger, isn't there? Not least in Nigeria itself. I mean, what does all this mean for Nigeria's President Tinubu?
Well, the Nigerian president has sort of distanced himself. Just the other day, the spokesperson of the president came out and to address this issue that people should not see this as, ECOWAS response to the situation in Niger as a Nigerian response. That, look, whatever decision had been taken so far was taken jointly by the ECOWAS leaders. But there's no question that President Tinubu is the leader of ECOWAS, and that, of course, this obviously would not look good for him because he talked tough at the very beginning, but, he probably didn't think this through very well, especially when you consider the fact that Niger and Nigeria would appear to be intertwined. You have a lot of Nigerians there. There are lots of Nigerians who have been displaced from the insurgents in the north of Nigeria, banditry and all of them. A lot of them are still in Niger. So you have Nigerian refugees in Niger, and you have quite a lot of Nigerians living in Nigeria as well. And there's this fear that if there was a war, it could spill over to Nigeria, the ripple effect, and could affect everyone. And then you have the Senate not signing up for any form of military intervention as well. And most importantly, northern senators, northern leaders are opposed to any form of military intervention. So I think all of this, of course, would have weighed on the decision, that presser now that President Tinubu addressed, where he said ECOWAS would prioritize dialogue and diplomacy. And let's not also forget that even the United States and the international community, the EU, all of them now are talking about dialogue. So nobody is really talking about military intervention, and it's a more reason why it's going to be difficult to see ECOWAS going ahead with that. Of course, if ECOWAS doesn't do something anyway, maybe with the sanctions and what have you, it will weaken its position. And of course, it's not a good sign. It's not a good sign for President Bola Tinubu, who is the chair of ECOWAS.
Deji, we'll talk later in the day. For the moment, thank you. Our correspondent, Deji Badamosi in Lagos. In Ukraine, 3 people are reported to have been killed in a Russian missile attack on the city of Zaporizhzhia, as well as the 3 fatalities. Ukrainian officials have claimed that 9 people were injured, including an 11-month-old baby. Elsewhere, Poland is moving an additional 10,000 troops to the border with Belarus following the arrival of Wagner mercenaries there last month. In the DPRK, President Kim Jong-un has sacked the country's top general. The Chief of General Staff, Pak Soo, has been replaced after just 7 months. He's been replaced by former Defense Minister General Ri Yong-gil. President Kim has also called on the country to prepare for the possibility of war and expand military preparations. The FBI has confirmed that they shot and killed a man who allegedly threatened to assassinate US President Joe Biden. The suspect, who was named as Craig Robertson, was killed in Salt Lake City as agents attempted to serve an arrest warrant. President Biden was scheduled to arrive in nearby Utah for a rally just a matter of hours later. 3 days of mourning and a state of emergency have been declared in Ecuador after a presidential election candidate was assassinated at a campaign rally. Fernando Villavicencio campaigned against corruption. His supporters protested outside the clinic where he died. A criminal gang has claimed responsibility. The country's outgoing president says the murder is an attempt to sabotage the election.
Todas las autoridades aquí reunidas.
All the authorities gathered here will stand together and agree that in the face of the loss of a Democrat and a fighter, the elections will not be suspended. On the contrary, they must be held and democracy has to be strengthened.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Nicolas Suarez, who's watching events for us. Nicolas, what more can you tell us about this?
Hello, Jamie. A few hours after the assassination of Fernando Villavicencio, the whole country remains in shock. Fernando Villavicencio was one of the top contenders for the upcoming presidential elections that are going to happen the 20th of August. Throughout his career, he worked as a union leader, a journalist, and a lawmaker, and also as a lawmaker, and he became one of the most outspoken critics against corruption and organized crime in the country. In fact, he published around 260 investigations about corruption. And his assassination comes just 2 weeks after the assassination of Manta's mayor, the 3rd biggest city in Ecuador, called Agustín Priago, who was also killed during a political reunion. Until the moment, the government has stated that 6 persons have been detained in the raids that are happening across Quito, the capital of the country. And one of the suspects was killed during his capture, according to government officials. Lasso also said that the crime won't go unpunished and declared a state of emergency for 60 days in the whole country, which will allow military forces to deploy in order to secure the elections and its correct proceeding. His family has mourned, and more specifically, his wife has complained about the fact that Fernando Villavicencio was shot while he was accessing a car that was not bulletproof as she demanded. The country mourns the loss of this candidate, and the shock remains as the most present feeling among Ecuadorians.
Nicolas, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Nicolas Suarez in Quito in Ecuador. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the United States seeks to restrict new American investments in China's high-tech sector. China calls it economic coercion.
Roger, Ricky, loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Thousands of people flee the Hawaiian island of Maui, where a raging wildfire has killed at least 36 people and burned entire neighborhoods to the ground. Our other headlines: West African leaders meet again to discuss the crisis in Niger as coup leaders name their new government. And 3 days of mourning and a state of emergency declared on Ecuador after a presidential candidate is assassinated at a campaign rally. US President Biden has issued an executive order to ban American investment in some areas of China's high-tech sector. Just hours after this announcement, China criticized the plans. The new rules are targeted at China's artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and semiconductor industries. The US government has been considering this move for some months and taken this action despite concerns from its chip-making companies. President Biden says the move is in the interests of national security, but China called it economic coercion and says it disrupts global supply chains. This order is subject to a public consultation period before it takes effect. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, why is this happening now? What's the significance of the timing?
You know, I think it's something that the Biden administration just felt that they had to do. I don't think they want to disrupt the Chinese economy. They don't want to disrupt the global economy. They just think that these three areas that they've picked are so crucial that they have to do something. I was down on the trading floor. I'm not now. I'm up here on the balcony. But yesterday, when the news came out, I was on the trading floor. So I was able to garner some opinions from people down there. And I think that they're just thinking, well, here we go again. You know, one step forward, 2 steps back, time and time again. Now, the three areas that have been picked by the Biden administration are pretty crucial high-tech areas. AI is one of them. Quantum computing is another. That just means very fast computing, really. Super, super, super fast. And semiconductors, of course. And I have to say, China, of course, remember, has told Micron, one of the big US chip makers, that they can't sell their chips in China anymore. Micron is still going ahead and investing in China despite that. So there's a bit of push and pull on both sides here. When you strip it all out, the bottom line is that the administration is keen to try and stop China from benefiting from the inward flow of money from US companies into its economy and then taking that money and using it to its advantage to make even faster semiconductors and even faster computers and even better AI. That's really at the heart of this. Now, it's not necessarily new. I mean, what's happened in the last 24 hours obviously is news, but we've known it was coming for some time. And in fact, last week we were told that the scope may not be as broad as it's actually turned out to be, which was a bit of a surprise yesterday. I know that Janet Yellen and probably Antony Blinken flagged this up to the Chinese when they were in Beijing a couple of weeks ago. And I know also that the US is looking to get support for this from the United Kingdom and also the European Union. Ironically, the great irony in all of this is that investment in China from the US is actually down compared to where it was a number of years ago, certainly post-COVID. So there's, I think, a certain irony in all of that. Jamie?
John, at the sharp end, what does this look like then? How big of an impact will these rules have on the industries and the global market?
Well, it is immediately going to affect private equity companies and venture capitalist companies. These are the people that stump up the money for all the new ideas. Without these people, there simply wouldn't be any innovation, certainly here in America. I mean, Wall Street, as I've already said, is very bewildered about what's going on. They remember, of course, you know, they're not very well disposed to China here at the moment because they got their fingers very badly burnt with the China crackdown on the big tech companies like Didi a couple of years ago, and they haven't forgotten that. They do want to trade with China and do good business with China, but they keep, you know, time and time again, a roadblock is put in the way, of which this is just one. China, of course, is super disappointed. The embassy in Washington, D.C., saying that they were very disappointed within the past 24 hours. Now the U.S. Treasury will move forward with all the authority of the presidency and this executive order to restrict any company looking to invest in China in these three areas. There are some exceptions, but I'm not going to go into them now, partly because they're very, very complicated to explain, and partly because I think we're moving into a public consultation period. Now, the administration in Washington calls this a small garden, high fence initiative. Small garden, high fence. In other words, it's targeted. They say in Washington there's still plenty of areas you can invest in Chinese economy if you want to, but just not these three now, assuming it goes ahead. 45 days then for stakeholders to put their views forward. We'll see what happens. We don't have a date when this might actually be implemented, if it's implemented at all, although most analysts are looking to it happening sometime next year, 2024. Jamie?
John, thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrace in New York. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has arrived in Singapore as he begins his visit to Southeast Asia. His trip is aimed at improving strategic communication to promote regional stability. Our correspondent Ali Asani reports.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has begun his 4-day diplomatic visit to Southeast Asia, encompassing Singapore, Malaysia and Cambodia. He touched down in the city-state of Singapore on Wednesday, accepting the invitation extended by his Singaporean counterpart, Vivian Balakrishnan. Balakrishnan is expected to host the Chinese Foreign Minister for dinner this evening. Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said that China's Foreign Minister is also scheduled to meet individually with Prime Minister Lee and Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. The visit by the Chinese Foreign Minister follows Singapore and China elevating their bilateral relationship earlier this year. The partnership, initially coined the All-Round Cooperative Partnership Progressing with the Times in 2015, has now matured into the All-Round High-Quality Future-Oriented Partnership. In a joint statement issued at the time, both parties expressed enthusiasm for boosting cooperation in trade, investment, sustainable and digital economies, food security, finance, aviation, and people-to-people exchanges. Assistant Professor Benjamin Ho from the Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore has said the current visit from Wang Yi reflects the strong ties between the two countries. He anticipates a candid and forthright discussion between the officials, given their history of frequent interactions. The director of the ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute, Mr. Choi Shing-kwok, said the trip demonstrates the high priority China places on relations with Southeast Asia for both economic and strategic reasons. He further added that the visit offers Beijing an opportunity to articulate its stand on recent developments in its relationship with the United States. Mr. Choi Shing-kwok also said China's decision to engage with Singapore, Malaysia, and Cambodia regarding such issues underscores the significance it places on Southeast Asian perspectives in international affairs.
China has lifted pandemic-era bans on group tours to a number of countries. Group visitors will now be allowed to visit the United States, Japan, South Korea and Australia in a move being hailed as a major boost for global tourism. Prior to the pandemic, Chinese tourists spent $255 billion overseas, with group tours accounting for almost 60% of that total. China's Shandong province has discovered gold bearing ore that could produce more than 200 tons of the metal. That would make the province home to China's largest gold mine. Exploration has taken 23 years due to complex geological conditions. The mine now has estimated total reserves of around 600 tons of gold, worth nearly $14 billion. And that discovery could help fuel the country's growing appetite for gold. In the first half of this year, shoppers bought 555 tonnes of gold jewellery, up more than 16% on the year before. But it seems diamonds are not forever and appear to have lost their shine with customers. Our correspondent Zhu Hua reports now from Shenzhen, China's biggest distribution centre for wholesale jewellery.
We are at Shenzhen's Shuibei Jewelry Market, the largest wholesale market of its kind in China. The market has been crowded with consumers from all over the country for months. As the international gold price continues to rise, let's go and see what the best seller is here.
The hustle and bustle of the Shuibei Jewelry Market since the beginning of 2023 mark a strong comeback from last year. With attractive designs, diverse styles and low prices, dozens of deals can be reached in seconds.
Shuibei is well known for its gold sales. The quality of gold is more reassuring than other places.
We are about to get married. We prefer to buy some gold rather than diamonds for inheritance or for wearing.
China's domestic consumption of gold jewelry reached 555 tons in the first half of 2023. Among the gold consumption, the purchase of gold bars jumped 30% year-on-year to 146 tons, while that of gold jewelry reached 368 tons, up almost 15% from the same period last year.
In 2023, our gold sales increased by 20 to 30% compared with the last year.
By contrast, the doorways of neighboring diamond stores looked relatively lonely, as the precious gems lost some significant value over the last few months.
The retail transaction volume of diamond inlays is relatively low, and the wholesale sales of our diamond inlays is also declining.
The sales of diamond jewelry have declined slightly, partly due to falling prices, fewer marriages, the impact of cultivated diamonds, and changing buyer behavior.
For daily social needs, some consumers look to art jewelry as an alternative to diamond jewelry.
Our sales of art jewelry in the first half of this year have increased by about 300% over the whole of last year.
Some economists say the booming gold sales are a direct reflection of a gloomy economic outlook.
When people feel about uncertainty about the future, especially on the economy, especially about the income growth, people will think to change their investments platform from the variety of the financial products to hard currencies such as gold, such as real estate.
However, Wu says that the real estate market hasn't looked good since the beginning of the last year, so Chinese consumers and investors have been looking at other products. Wu added, proper stimulative policies are still needed to ensure a healthy market and economic rebound. Zhu Hua, CGTN, Shenzhen, Guangdong Province.
The Yi people, an ethnic minority in China, are celebrating their Torch Festival at the moment in Guizhou Province. Thousands of visitors joined the Torch March with members of the minority community. The event pays tribute to fire and ancestors. During the celebration, visitors from across the country will be dancing, watching the bullfighting, wrestling, and a beauty pageant. The headlines again. Thousands of people flee the Hawaiian island of Maui, where a raging wildfire has killed at least 36 people and burnt entire neighborhoods to the ground. Our other headlines: West African leaders meet again to discuss the crisis in Niger as coup leaders name their new government. And the United States moves to restrict new American investments in China's high-tech sector. China calls it economic coercion. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.